The Ren channel does not mean conception. The character Ren means a responsibility, how I take on responsibility, appointments, or assignments. On the left, we have the character for a person, Ren, and on to the right of it is another Ren, a burden, which is work, gong, with a pole in the middle carrying it. Conception or pregnancy is also Ren, but to the left is a woman and not a person of any gender. Pregnancy is, for better or worse, a burden only women engage in, and that is not what the Ren channel is about. The Do and the Ren, to oversee and to take responsibility, both have a connotation similar to what we would associate in other traditions with the central channel, in front of the spine, a movement upwards. But here we have two of them, one in the back, a yang one, and one in the front, a yin one, complementing each other. The Do is pushing up and forward. It supervises, governs, and pushes. It is yang in nature. If we do too much of that, we will physically find that our ribs have splayed forward, the back will be full of tension. We need a counterbalance to that movement, something that contains it, consolidates it, be its yin counterpart. Both the Ren and the Do are initiated with the pelvic floor lifting and hollowing, creating the space of the very lower abdomen. From there, the Do pushes up towards the brain and the crown of the head, and the Ren moves up, shouldering that movement up, giving it a container, bringing it back to the center, back to the core. And so the pathologies of the Ren are concentrated in the lower jiao and not in the middle or upper jiaos, because it is about retaining our core, our consolidation, as we expand up and out. Ren 1, Hui Yin, the assembly of yin, is the perineal floor. On the one hand, it is obviously a very yin area, in that it is as low in the torso as one gets, and it is secluded or hidden. On the other hand, the action here would be of lifting and hollowing, which is yang. Of course, most people do not have the lift or the awareness of this area and simply collapse the perineum into gravity. There are 8 Hui, meeting or assembly points. They are Ren 1, Hui Yin, bladder 35, Hui Yang, to the back and to the side of Ren 1, perhaps representing more clearly the lift of the perineal floor and torso. There is an ancestral assembly, or a gathering of gathering, which is Sanjiao 7, Hui Zhang. There is 100 gatherings at Du 20, Bai Wei, a 5 earth gathering at gallbladder 42, Di Hu Wei, a skull gathering at Du 22, Xin Wei, a listening gathering, gallbladder 2, Ting Wei, and an upper arm gathering, Sanjiao 13, Na Wei. Some of these gatherings might be local, like an upper arm gathering or the skull gathering, and some perhaps specific to one issue, like the listening gathering, gallbladder 2. But certainly a yin or yang gathering, like Ren 1, must have a wide influence on a whole organism, which the perineal floor does. Ren 2, Gu, the curved bone, is presumably named after the pubic bone and the curve in its center, just as kidney 11 is, Hengu, the horizontal bone. And it so happens that a curve in the bone connotes a very yin, or a deep position. Ren 3, Zhangji, the central pole, the North Star, is Beiji Xing, the star of the North Pole. So in a sense, Ren 3 can also be considered as the North Star. The Ren and the Chong are said to start just below Zhangji, the central pole, and the Du is said to begin at the Shu of the lower pole, the Xiaji. Both terms are a bit unclear. The lower pole is an undefined point, perhaps something just in front of the sacrum. But What does it mean below Ren 3? Does it mean towards Ren 2? Or does it mean below Ren 3 as in deeper in the abdomen, behind Ren 3? And since there seems to be a lower and a middle pole, where might there be an upper pole, or is there an upper pole? We do have Heart 1, Ji Chuan, that could be in some way suggesting that the upper pole will be related to the heart. And Lingshu 49 talks of the Emperor's Palace, assuming that is the heart, is located in the lower pole, which people then assume means yin tongue, because we're talking about the face. So the question of where are these possible three poles and how they are related does not have a clear definitive answer. What is clear is that we do have a middle pole at Ren 3, regardless of whether this is where the Ren and chunks start from, below it, or in what direction. A pole affects the whole internal landscape. The North Pole asserts its magnetic influence throughout the Earth. So our central pole, at Ren 3, has a similar effect in the body. Being a central pole, it makes sense that its stronger effect will be felt at the extremities. And interestingly enough, Ren 3 is a very good point for problems at the fingertips and the toes, the hands and the feet. Being the central pole, I also use Ren 3 as a point to help generate new tissue, new cells, often with spleen 8, DG, the earth machine. Ren 3 is the mu point of the bladder and will often have pressure pain in patients with all manners of bladder problems. Because we can look at Ren 3 as the North Star, Ren 21, Xuanji, the sextant, can be used to release it, because a sextant is an instrument that is used to locate the North Star. Du 23, the upper star, can also be helpful. Ren 4, Guan Yuan, is the gateway to the primary. Yuan means primary or original and connotes the head. Guan is a gate with silk or rope in between, so it is not an open, a clear gate, but more like a gate with some obstacle, a checkpoint. Ren 4 has a strong resonance with the head, especially with the top of the head. It is my main point to be used in autoimmune diseases and cardiac cases. However, I do not use it if the pulse is slow, because activation of the lower abdomen tends to slow the pulse down even further. Ren 5, Ximen, is the stone gate. While the gate here is clear, unlike the Guan of Ren 4, there is a stone in the name suggesting accumulations, piling, heaviness. When we looked at the kidney channel, we looked at the lower part of the abdomen as representing the hollowness of the lift of the perineal floor, with stomach 30, the hub of Qi, Ren 3, the central pole, kidney 13, the cave of Qi, etc. While between Ren 4 and the navel, this is where accumulations will tend to reflect. And Ren 6, Qi high, being at the center of that area of accumulation, having the ability to move them. Ren 5 represents by name that capacity for accumulations. Guan Yuan, Ren 4, the passage between these two areas, and Qi high, the movement pivot in the upper part, both have shu points, Guan Yuan shu, bladder 26, and Qi high shu, bladder 24. And Ren 6, Qi high, the ocean of Qi, can be seen as an ocean in a number of different ways. For most practitioners, it seems to represent a storehouse of Qi, a place to tonify Qi, and an ocean in the sense of where all the water goes to. It can also be a place where Qi can be moved, and it can also be looked at as the place where Qi can be calmed. All can work with ocean, almost depending on the quality of the ocean and its waves. The calming idea tends to be less popular amongst practitioners, but Ren 6 is an excellent point with people with a rapid pulse and an edgy nervous system, and that includes many people with chronic pain, which has put their nervous system under stress. I use the moving metaphor for gallstones, in which case I would use Ren 6 with stomach chi and gallbladder 34. Ren 6 is also one of the ocean points, with kidney 6, spleen 10, small intestine 8, and heart 3, that treat mineral imbalances, with the idea that ocean, which is in the name of all these points, connotes salty water. But I would take Ren 6 out of that combination if the pulse is slow. Ren 7, Yin Jiao, Yin intersection, is suggesting that this is about the intersection of yin channels here. This fits with other intersection points, spleen 6, San Yin Jiao, and gallbladder 35, Yang Jiao, which are also points where 3 channels meet. Here at Ren 7, it is the Ren, the Chang, and the kidneys that are meeting. Now we arrive at Shen Chue, Ren 8, the watchtower over the Shen. The middle Jiao is delineated by 2 of these watchtowers. At the bottom, we have Ren 8, Shen Chue, perhaps where the Shen entered us from the ancestors. And at the top, at Ren 14, Ju Chue, the great watchtower, is the Mu of the heart. Ren 9, Shui Fan, the water divider, is our first point of the middle Jiao. We do speak of Ren 9 pulse, but in truth the pulse one feels is really a navel pulse, not a Ren 9 pulse per se. That pulse can often be felt above the navel all the way to Ren 12 and even above, and below the navel, mostly to the left of the navel below it. It is a pulse one feels when one presses on Ren 9, or above or around the navel, and the patient will feel it also, and it can at times literally be seen either as the beating of the pulse or as a quivering of the abdomen at the navel. That pulse signifies a weakness in the mesentery tissue, since the aorta is just in front of the spine, deep enough inside the abdomen, so if the abdominal tissue has good integrity, one would not be feeling the pulse, even when pressing in a bit. So this would be considered a weakness of the lower dantian. And no, it has nothing to do with tightness of the abdominal muscles, as people with quite tight abdominals can still have a pulse at Ren 9 or around it. It is really a deeper weakness than the muscles on the surface. It can also be considered a heart or an emotional issue, as the blood is the carrier of our emotions. So it is as if the heart can no longer contain one's emotions, and they spill out, pulsating. The quivering is almost always an indication of a fragility of the nervous system. Originally, Nagano used stomach 24 for pressure pain on Ren 9, which was considered a sadness reflex, while Ren 17 is considered an anxiety reflex, and Ren 15 is considered a worry reflex. This is a rather clever analysis of the point names, as stomach 24 is named Huayou Men, the slippery flesh gate, and Ren 9 is a water divider, so there's a theme of water here, and if there is a pulse, then there's a slipperiness as well. And using it on the right side because it is the blood side. I personally have not found this to be as effective as I would like, and I prefer to strengthen the lower abdomen by using Mushu, a point that is level with Ren 4 all the way to the side, below gallbladder 26. This activates the lift of the perineal floor and hence strengthens the lower dantian. For straight-out pressure pain on Ren 9 that I interpret to be emotional, sadness, I tend to prefer spleen 3 with a pericardium point. When looking at the point name, Shui Fan, water dividing, we can see that Ren 9 is related to the small intestine, that which divides the fluids between the clear and the turbid. The navel does reflect the small intestine. Foam palm pressure pain on the navel or pressure pain on Ren 9 are both signs of small intestine issues. And for that, I would use the combination of small intestine 1 or 2 or small intestine 3. So in that way, Ren 9 fits in with the other points of the middle jiao and its theme. Ren 10, 12, and 13 all share the same name, Xiaowan, Zhangwan, and Shangwan, the lower, central, and upper one. The character 1 is the stomach cavity, and sometimes instead of 1, these points are called Xiaguan, Zhangguan, and Shangguan, where guan means a pipe. The character is composed of a bamboo flute, and it can also mean to manage, to take care of, or to control. This suggests to us the central role of Ren 12 as the source of postnatal qi, as well as the start of the meridian system, as the beginning of the lung meridian. According to Kiiko, the character 1 is explained in Han-era dictionaries as guzi, the grease of the bone, which connotes the marrow, being the fatty substance inside the bone. This would imply that Ren 12 should help the marrow and spinal issues, which indeed it does. In the back, behind Ren 12, we have Du 6, Qi Zhong, the spine center, so we can see that the ancients felt that this area affects the whole spine. Sometimes one will find that Ren 10 does a better job for the lower back, while Ren 12 does a better job for the middle back, and Ren 13 does a good job for the neck. But this is not always the case. And since myelin is also a fat, Ren 12 can be interpreted as relating to the nervous system or to myelin, and again one finds that it is an excellent point for many neurological conditions. Did the ancients name Ren 12, 10, and 13 with 1 as having the connotation of guzi, as some sort of a hidden code for some of its potentials? I don't know. But when we look at it from our vantage point, we can see that there is a connection between how we interpret the character 1 and what Ren 12 seems to be able to accomplish. Pressure pain on Ren 12 represents the stomach. It can be the stomach as an organ, or it can be the stomach as a sac, the rogue, representing the fu organs in general, because Ren 12 is also the master of all the fu organs. And part of that is that it has a clear relationship with the uterus, an extraordinary fu. It can also represent a nervous or a stressed stomach. Most people will identify that they feel stress either in the chest, their stomach, or their intestines. Ren 12 can be released with either kidney points, kidney 7 or kidney 9, stomach chi points or stomach 41, the immune points, or a combination of all of these. Also consider releasing tension in the neck as a way to release the vagus nerve first. And even needling gallbladder 12 directly. Gallbladder 12 is one gu, the complete bone, and this one is basically the same as the one in Ren 12, except it does not have the flesh radical. When a pulse does not show up clearly, direct moxa, OQ, on Ren 12 can make the pulse have a better definition or gain strength if needed, so it can be assessed again with greater accuracy. In the midst of the 3 1 points, we have Ren 11, Jian Li, establishing the interior. This is one of the Li points where Li is meant to be written in long form to mean interior rather than in short form meaning mile, which is also the case for Heart 5, Tong Li, to penetrate the interior. When the middle jiao is strong, the interior is erected properly. It is well established. I am not sure why it was inserted between Ren 11 and 12, or rather between Ren 10 and 12, and what that significance might be. Clinically speaking, all 4 points, Ren 10 through 13, can serve as surrogates for the main idea expressed in Ren 12, with relatively minor nuances, which demonstrates the importance of Ren 12 the start of the meridians, the mu of the stomach, the meeting point of the four organs, the quintessential representation of the middle jiao. We now arrive at the top of the middle jiao with Ren 14, Ju Che, the huge watchtower. I think this is in reference to approaching the ribs, coming into the domain of the upper jiao and the heart, for which Ren 14 serves as a mu point. Ren 15, Jiu Wei, the dovetail, refers to its location at the edge of the xiphoid bone, like a tail. Pressure pain here on Ren 14-15 will show up in emotional problems, and we tend to say that this is the so-called worry reflex, and we will use spleen 3 and pericardium points to treat it. It can also show up in cases of acid reflux. And in cardio conditions, this area might show pressure pain when pressed up and to the left rather than just straight down. We are now on the ribs, in the upper jiao, in the domain of the zongqi, the domain of the heart. Ren 16, Zhongting, the central court, reflects this. Ting is a courtyard with a roof over it, and it can also connote a garden. It is where people go and stand. It is a waiting area in the imperial palace, so we're here just before we come to the heart to see the emperor. The four Ren points on the chest, Ren 16, 17, 18, and 19, are all rather similar, and like we saw in the middle jiao, they can all be considered as one theme that is expressed especially in Ren 17. At Ren 17, Shanzhang, the chest center, we have arrived at the heart, although, like any decent imperial palace, there will be more halls to tour. Ren 17 reflects the heart physically as well as emotionally, and we call it the anxiety reflex. On stronger pressure, it can represent problems with acid reflux as well. And in our palace, there is still a jade hall, Yu Tang, the Ren 18, again serving the same theme. And there is also the purple palace, Zhegang, the Ren 19. And having been through the palace of the heart and its various halls and chambers, Ren 20, Hua Gai, the flowery canopy, suggests that things can now flourish as our connection with the heart has been established. It is as if this is the result, the conclusion of having taken the Ren, the responsibility, and shouldering it well. As we move up, the names seem to get more grandiose sort of thing. I think it is also a reflection of a physical reality, which is that as we move up the ribs, it tends to be harder to establish freedom in that intercostal space. And the lower we are on the ribs, the more mobile they're going to be. Most people, when asked to lift the chest, will tend to lift the lower ribs and splay the back. It takes a lot of awareness and physical cultivation to lift, say, the second intercostal, and the movement here will be much more subtle. When we have established the Ren, the responsibility, physically as our sense of the center, we're much more able to do that, lift the chest, and spread the intercostals, than to resort to the grosser movement of the splaying of the ribs and the squeezing of the shoulder blades together. And that's when there is a sort of a floweriness or a magnificence to the process. Now that we have established the three jiaos, the responsibility of being human, the upright posture, and a concentration into the center of the body, the center line, and the heart is flourishing, we come to Ren 21, Xuanji. Xuanji is an instrument that revolves in order to be fixed on the North Star. Both characters have the emperor on the left. Xuan has the character to orbit to the right of it, and Ji has how many to the right of it. In other words, we're trying to fix onto one. We have already been to the Emperor's palace. Now we can orient ourselves to our heart. And we recall that the North Star, the central pole, Zhangji, is Ren 3, and Ren 21 can be used to fix problems that reflect on Ren 3, such as bladder problems. And now we come to the border of the torso and the throat, to Ren 22, Qian 2, which people like to call the celestial chimney. 2 means abrupt or to dash. It shows a dog rushing out of its cave. One could think of the throat as a passage, a chimney that narrows, moving upwards, and the 3 points that have the character 2 in them are large intestine 18, stomach 10, and Ren 22, and all are in the throat. But I think the emphasis here is on the action, the movement, and not so much the structure. So the chimney is a metaphor that is not so much about the static structure, but more about the abrupt movement that happens in a chimney as smoke sort of rushes through it. When the consolidation of the Ren, our responsibility, is accomplished, we can move upwards to the brain, towards 220, with alignment. We can also see this point as a reference to abnormal movement upwards, as in coughing, hiccups, and acid reflux, all of which are movements that rush upwards towards or through Ren 22. It is obviously a very famous point for coughing, though I tend to use it with a diode ring rather than with a needle. I also use it with DO20 and a 3 bypass cord for sinus issues, and at times for other issues in the face. Ren 22 and Ren 23 give the borders of the throat, of the vocal diaphragm, or what is called in the yogic traditions Jalandhara Bandha, where the sternum is pulled up and the chin comes down to rest on it, so as to reinforce the lift of the perineal floor, the Mula Bandha. In Ren 23, Lian Chuan, the ridge fountain, or the honest fountain, is on the other delineator of the Jalandhara Bandha. So one can look at that name as related to the Adam's apple, and hence it is a ridge or a corner, or we can look at it as the top of the honest fountain that moves up all the way, the front of the spine, coming up to here to enter the skull. And at the back, that would be where we would call it 216. This end of the upward movement and entering the skull or the brain. The Ren could end at the throat, but it actually does move up into the skull and ends up in the eyes. Ren 24, Changjiang, to receive the broth, is on the face. We could say it is where the broth is received when it is spilled out of our mouth. But somehow, the idea that a point was named after dribbling food does not seem so interesting. Not so much because it is unappetizing or because it does not speak to a human issue, but because it does not apply to most of us and makes it sound like a landmark for post-stroke patients only. And yet that point exists on all of us. So yes, the point can be seen as receiving the broth, but I'm looking at it as suggesting something equivalent with DO26, the human center, Renjiang, above the mouth, which speaks to the human existence as depending on eating and breathing. Here, at Ren 24, there's another statement on the human condition. We might be looking at what happens when we have taken on the responsibility of life, of being human. The character for broth is made up of water below and to go in the future above it. So it is a bit of a clever way to say that we receive the broth, we receive the future when we consolidate the core of our human experience. It is expressed in the future, in us connecting to all generations, and therefore having a future.